Hello everyone, welcome to the class. Last class we have seen about the population ecology, the basics of population ecology, mark recap up to mark recapture theory we have completed. So this class we will be seeing the natality, mortality and survivorship curve. So first coming to natality. What is natality? Natality refers to the birth of individual in a population. So basically natality is your birth rate, right? That is what we call natality, right? Mortality, if we talk about mortality refers to the death of individual in a population. So it simply defines the death rate of a population, right? So so next is survivorship curve. So what is survivorship curve? This is a graph, and this graph or this curve is used to plot the number of surviving individual to a particular age. So we draw this curve to represent the number of surviving organism of a particular age. Survivorship curve are graphs that shows what fraction of population survives from one age to the next. So it basically defines the age period on which the in which the organism becomes active, or in which there is a it shows how the health level decreases with the age or increases with the age. So that's what is represented by the survivorship curve. So here population rate, any population rate depends on mortality, the death rate, natality, birth rate, immigration, the number of organism entering into a particular area, and emigration is number of organism going out from a particular area. Now if we talk about survivorship curve, there are basically three types of survivorship curve. What are the three types? You can see this is convex type 1. So here if you see, this is first we will focus on these three types. What are the three types? Convex or type 1, diagonal or type 2, concave or type 3. So if we talk about this one is type 1, we called it a concave curve, right? So this curve is basically represented by humans. So I have drawn this human here. Next, type 2. Type 2, if you see, it is quite diagonal. So we also called it is a diagonal curve, and it is represented by birds. Coming to type 3. Type 3 is concave and it is represented by trees. Right? So there are three types of survivorship curve: type 1, type 2, type 3. Type 1 is also known as convex, type 2 is also known as diagonal, and type 3 is also known as concave. So if you see, it is plotted between the number of individual surviving and maximum percentage of life expectancy. Right? So it is used to show the number of surviving individual. So coming to type 1, that is your convex curve. So if we talk about convex curve, it is characterized by high age specific survival probability in early and middle life. That means this curve is represented by those organisms which have the higher rate of survival at a very early and middle life. That means this organism shows high survival rate at early and middle life. So at later life, what happened? Their health declined with the age. So example is a human has a very good survival rate at early and middle life, right? With the age, the survival rate decreases because of the diseases, because of the health deterioration, right? So this is followed by rapid decline in survival in later life. So there is a decline in the survival in later life. This basically type 1, what we have seen, type 1 is represented by those organisms which have a very high survival rate at early and middle life, right? And they have a very low survival rate with age or in later life because of the health deterioration. Right? So there are of species that produces few offspring but care for them well. So these also characterized organisms which reproduce or which produces very few offspring, and they show a high parental care. High parental care, that means they care for their kids so much, right? As they have a very few kids, so they show a very high parental care. So example, humans, large mammals like sheep, goats, right, etc. They belongs to heteroparous species. So what is heteroparous species? Species that breathe several times during the course of their lifespan. So what is heteroparous species? Species that breathe several times during the course of their lifespan, right? So what we have seen in type 1 convex curve, type 1 convex curve is characterized by organisms which have a high survival rate at early and middle life, and their survival rate decreases with age. That means their survival rate decreases in later life. Why? Because of the deterioration of the health conditions. They also shows high parental care as they have a few kids, so the parental care is very much high. Example, human and large mammals like sheep, goats. Mango tree also will come under type 1 because mango tree shows heteroparous breeding. That means they breed during several times during their lifespan, right? So that is type 1 convex curve. Coming to type 2 curve, if we define type 2 curve, it is basically an intermediate between type 1 and type 2. I have shown you that is represented. If this is type 1, this is type 2, right? And this is type 1, type 2, type 3. 1, 2, 3. So this is basically in between the type 1 and type 2. So the rate of survival here, as it represents the intermediate one, so here the organisms which representing the type 2 will have a survival rate same throughout their lifespan. Like we have seen in type 1, they have a high survival rate during an early and middle life, right? But in case of type 2 organisms, they do not have any survival rate with their lifespan. They have a constant, or they have their survival rate remains same throughout their lifespan, right? So survival probability is experienced regardless of age. So there is no effect of age on the survival rate of the organism, right? So example is bird, hydra, mice, lizard. They show constant mortality rate. So they do not have any dependency of age on the survival rate. So they have a constant constant mortality rate, and their survival probability is experienced regardless of age. So the organisms which show this type, which represent this type 2 curve is birds, hydra, mice, lizard, etc. Coming to type 3, if we talk about type 3 type 3 curve, or it is also known as concave curve. Why? Because it is characterized by species where the mortality rate is higher at young stage and has chances to decrease mortality rate at later life. So type 3 will show characters. Type 3 will represent the characters that is reversed of type 1. That is reversed of type 1. So this is opposite of type 1. Whatever the characteristics you will be studying in type 3, it is completely opposite of type 1. In type 1, we have seen this is represented by organisms which have a higher survival rate at early and middle life. But here in type 3 curve, we have seen that this is characterized by species where the mortality rate is higher at young stage. So that is opposite, right? But chances of mortality decreases. Once they go to their later life, their mortality decreases, right? So this is completely opposite of type 1. So whatever the points we are studying here, it is completely opposite of the type 1 curve. So in type 1, we have seen that those organisms shows high parental care as they have a very few offspring. But here in type 3 curve, what is this? It is characterized by species that produces a large number of offspring. As large number of offsprings are produced, so their parental care decreases. So they shows little parental care, right? And type 1 was represented by organisms which breed several times during their lifetime. That's why we call them heteroparous. But here in type 3, it is characterized by organisms that breed once during their lifetime. During their entire lifetime, they breed once. And that organism, we call it simulparous species. We call it what? Simulparous species. Simulparous species breed single time during their lifetime, right? So example is oyster, bacteria, insects, bamboo. So what we have seen that survivorship curve are of three types. What are the three types? This is type 1, right? This is type 1 and this is type 2, right? And this is type 3. So here this is type 1 and it is represented by humans, and this is type 2. This is represented by birds, and this is type 3 represented by insects, lizards, then tree also you can see tree. Yes, so these are the survivorship curve. This is also known as convex, right? This is known as diagonal and this is known as concave, right? So these are the survivorship curve. Now if we go through type 1 survivorship curve, if we see type 1, then what we have seen that this is characterized by organisms which shows heteropairous breeding, heteropairous species. That means they breed several times during their lifespan, and these are represented by species which shows high parental care, right? Then these represent organisms which have higher survival rate at early and middle life, and their survival rate decreases with later life. You can say survival rate decreases at later life, right? So type 1 is represented by those characters. The type 1 is represented by species having this particular characters, right? Now if we talk about type 2, let's move to type 2. Type 2 is also known as diagonal, right? So if we see type 2, how it is represented? So this is basically intermediate. They do not have any dependency. They do not have any dependency of survival rate with age. They show constant mortality rate. So they are represented. Example, we have seen that this is represented by birds, right? Birds is a common example of type 2. Then let's go for type 3. If we see type 3. So these are represented by organisms which have a higher survival rate, at later life or during the later life. Higher survival rate during later life. Less survival rate during early and middle stage, right? Then they show these are represented by organisms which produces large number of offsprings. As they produce large number of offspring, so they show very little parental care, right? Then they show little parental care, and they represent organisms which are similparous. Similparous means what? They breed only once during their lifetime. Breed only once during their lifetime, right? So that is what is the survivorship curve. So this class we have seen the survivorship curve. Next class we will be dealing with the population dispersion, right? Population dispersion will be dealing in the next class. Then we will be dealing with exponential and logistic curves. In case if you have any doubts, please feel free to ask. Thank you so much, students, for joining the session.